My name is Lynda Simmons. And I want to speak to the way of Jesus, in the way of Jesus. I love that. I think that that's something that I think about a lot, how I live today. I have a mantra that says that I often say, live peacefully, love freely, forgive faithfully. It's a tall order, not easy to do. But those are the three things that I really try to do. And for me, I really believe that is the way of Jesus. I tell people Jesus is my homeboy. And, and that's what I look to when I find myself in difficult situations, or particularly with people. And I think a lot of the situations that I find myself in where I'm challenged have to do with relationships. And I do believe in people, helping people. I believe in the therapeutic value of one human being helping another human being, and being of service. And service is key word. I think that is the way of Jesus. So I try to live that way. I do the best that I can. My journey has been one of, I've had lots of opportunities to experience and put my money where my mouth is. Yeah, you're going to edit that, okay. Where this has been most challenging for me in my faith, in 2004, my son Brian, Petty Officer Brian Eddie Coletti, who was in the United States Coast Guard, had come home on leave. And during that leave, the first weekend he was home, there was a random act of violence and my son was murdered. Definitely didn't see it coming, would have never imagined that could have happened to me. And initially, right away, some of what I learned at that point was, one, I really am not in control of what happens in life. All I have any power or control over is what I do with it. And so again, going back to the way of Jesus, that was my saving grace. And grace, absolutely, is what has me here, sitting here today, and still keeps me moving forward. Sometimes I feel like my progress could be more or better or whatever. It is what it is, and I do the best that I can. And I do remember that I am a human being like everybody else. So my son was murdered by a young man who was 18 years old. Like I said, it was a random act of violence. And that young man was convicted. He was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years to 18 years, 9 months. And 1 year after he was arrested, 1 year almost to the day, we went to court for his sentencing hearing. So I am a advocate for restorative justice. I'm a victim advocate, and I am an advocate for offenders as well. In going to the sentencing hearing that day, I was prepared. I had an impact statement. I had written a poem to this young man. I had all these pictures of my son in my lap that I was prepared to show him so that I could somehow express to him, what he had taken from me. So I was the first one to take the stand that day. And when I got up on the stand and I faced him for the first time at all, I'd only seen him in the newspaper, in pictures. I had never faced him, I had not seen him in person up to this point. And when I sat there and I faced him for the first time, this young man was looking back at me. He's 19 years old now, looked very different from his arrest mugshot. And I remember thinking, oh my God, he's so young. He's just a kid. He was 5 years younger than my son, who he killed. My son was 24 years old when he died. And he had these big brown eyes. And I remember when I sat there and I was looking at him and he was looking directly at me, and with these big brown eyes, there were these big tears just streaming down his cheeks. And his eyes would kind of fill up halfway with water, and then these tears would just stream down his face. And that really struck me, because my son Brian, he cried like that ever since he was a little boy. I mean, he had big brown eyes, and they would fill up with water, and then these big old crocodile tears would just fall down his cheeks and just splash out. And so I was struck by that immediately. And then the next thing I realized was, or what hit me next, was when I looked at this young man, I was filled with this overwhelming sense of love. It was very confusing. I think in the moment, kind of scary. I didn't understand how I could look at him in the eye and feel a feeling like love when he had taken the most precious thing from me that he could have ever taken from me. But I couldn't deny it. That's what I was feeling. When I was looking into his eyes, I really, truly believed that I was looking into the eyes of God. The eyes are the windows to the soul. They are the portal to humanity. I didn't see his skin color. I didn't see or think about necessarily his actions. I saw and I felt this human being sitting in front of me, just like me, this young man. And I really believed that, definitely I was looking into the eyes of God in that moment, and then a peace just washed over me. And all of that took place probably in 15 seconds. It felt like an eternity. The courtroom was full of people on James's side, everybody who loved him and was there for him. And of course on our side, everybody who loved Brian and was there on Brian's behalf. So I proceeded and I shared my poem. I read my impact statement. I shared with him how I forgave him, and I forgave him before he was even arrested. I had forgiven the young people that had done this. And that doesn't make me a saint or anything. And I can tell you that initially the forgiveness piece was because it's the right thing to do. What I didn't know until I started on that journey, how much it was going to ask of me, and how that was truly going to become a way of life. And it is today. So coming out of the courtroom, I didn't have to show him the pictures. I didn't feel a need to do any of that. We got through that piece of it. I do remember, and this is really important to me, when I walked into the courtroom that day, we walked down an aisle that separates everybody. And I was really very aware of that separation. It's almost like a wall between us. It's an us and them situation. And unfortunately, our legal system is kind of set up that way. And when I left there, before I left there, when I sat up there and I saw everybody in that courtroom, I understood that courtroom was full of victims. So when I looked out in the courtroom and I realized that everybody in there were victims, we were not the only victims. We were the obvious victims. We were the victims that society accepts. We're allowed to share our pain and to be open about it. But the victims, that were hurting on James's side, they're the ones that people, they kind of suffer in silence. And I really, really understood that. Everybody in there, because of one moment, one choice, one young man made, and it created the ripple effects just go on and on. So coming out of the courtroom, I do remember hugging James's grandmother. You know, he was sentenced, like I said, to the 15 years to 18 years, 9 months. And when I came out and hugged her, and of course she was crying, and I remember saying to her, there are no winners here today. Nobody won. You know, I honestly believe that in the moment that man made that choice, that young man, when he shot that gun that claimed my son's life, I believe that God hung his head and cried. Because in that moment, he lost 2 children, you know. And then I say he lost 2 children, but my personal belief is one of them went home to him. You know, my son is with Jesus. He walks with Jesus. I know that. And we won't even get into why I know that now. So fast forwarding and moving forward, I'm very involved in the restorative justice. And in restorative justice, you know, there's victim offender dialogue is a part of the restorative justice. And what restorative justice is, it's a different way of looking at our justice system. And I don't even like saying justice system because I'm afraid a lot of times we don't get justice. It's our legal system. And so the restorative justice is to repair the harm that's been caused, you know, as much as that's possible to do. And it takes into account everybody that is involved in that. So it's victim-centered. And then you have your offender, you know, and you have the community, you know, because the community as a whole is also victimized. I mean, everybody is impacted by a crime, whatever the crime is, even a theft, you know, there are victims. So victim offender dialogue is when you come to the table, you know, and you get to really talk to one another and you get to see the humanity, you know, you get to try to understand where each person's coming from. And you don't make assumptions. In my case, a lot of that, there were a lot of assumptions made, you know, and that's because we never got to come to the table and talk to one another. I did, after a while, I needed some time to sit with what happened in the courtroom. I needed some time for myself to work that out. And when I got ready, I went to see my friend John Powell, Professor Powell at Campbell Law University, and I told him I was ready and that I wanted to initiate the victim offender dialogue. And so at that point, he came to see my husband and I, and we had a very good, long talk, heartfelt. And then he and Joya Karen, who is now Joya Powell, they contacted James in prison, and they got permission to come see him, and they went and sat with him for about 3 hours. And they had a really good conversation, and when they came out, they couldn't wait to call me, and they called me. And you know, like I said, it's victim-centered, so a victim offender dialogue can only happen if the victim initiates it. So I initiated, James accepted. The other piece to this is he also has to accept full accountability for what he had done, which he did and has been. And he was very open for him and I coming together to have a conversation. I wanted so much to sit with him again, and I wanted to look in his eyes again. I can't tell you, this was probably the span of 4 years before I finally got to where I could initiate this. But in that 4 years, I thought about him all the time. And here's what I know, that James and I are intimately connected and always will be, whether I like it or not. You know, we are connected through my son. And I also knew that he would be released from prison. And so what mattered to me was who was he going to be when he got out of prison? You know, I felt like I held something that he needed for his healing, because he obviously, something was broken somewhere when you can take a life at the age of 18. And I felt like he held something that I needed for my healing, and that we had something to exchange with each other. So, you know, unfortunately, when we asked, you know, we had to take it to the powers that be and ask permission to come together and sit with each other, the Department of Justice said no. And really no reason, they just said no. It's not a common practice in North Carolina, and it's something we're working towards. Because what I felt like in that moment was I was re-victimized. And that I had this group of strangers telling me what I could and could not do for my own healing and what I needed. We were perfectly suited to come together, both in agreement, had the best mediators we could have, you know, and so we met all the criteria in the best way. So I had said I would accept whatever the decision was, and you know, and would turn it over and give it to God. And so I did that for a couple months. And then I decided, I called my friend John Powell, and I said, you know, I feel like God is nudging me and I'm not done. Or maybe it's just me pushing this agenda. I don't know. I said, but I truly believe that there's more that can be done here. And so what I wanted to know was if I could write to this young man, if we were allowed to write letters. And so he didn't know. He needed to contact whoever he needed to contact to get that permission to find out. He did. He called me back. He said, yes, you can write to him. He said, and he can write back to you. So with that, I went about writing my letter to James, that first letter. So I wrote my first letter to James, which was a lot harder than I expected it to be. And when I sent the letter, I waited, and I wasn't sure he would respond or not, but he did. And I'm very grateful for the letters that we have shared with each other. And they're very personal to me. They're sacred. The only other people that have read those letters are John and Joya at Campbell Law, because I did everything through the Restorative Justice Clinic there. And I explained that to James in my first letter, you know, that I was doing it that way because other people needed to have this opportunity. And I felt like we needed a paper trail to open the door and to make a way for people to come together and partake in their own healing process, you know, and to help heal each other. So the letters were very powerful for me. And that just started, you know, that was a whole other area where there was a big shift. During this time, I also started going into prisons with the Restorative Justice Clinic and the students at Campbell Law. And we were doing victim impact. I call them healing circles. And our first one was on death row in Raleigh Central Prison. I went the day that first circle, the woman who walked into that prison, I knew walking in, I was not walking out the same woman, and I didn't. I shared my story with them in that circle. Those men gave back to me. You know, I became a surrogate victim for them, is what really, in essence, what happened. And they became a surrogate defendant, or, you know, they were James, every one of them. In fact, that's what they said to me after I shared my story. They went around giving affirmation to me after sharing my story. Each one of them said, apologized to me and said, I'm sorry, I'm James Moore. I'm James Moore. I'm sorry I hurt you. It was really powerful, really powerful. I went back to that particular circle a couple of times. I was able to get down there. I had a home in Fayetteville, and I was still near the Raleigh area. And so I was able to get down there more and go to the circle and really got to build some relationships with these men in this circle. And these were men that were condemned to die by society. These were men that were thrown away behind the wall, that are, not thought of again. And what I want to tell you is these men helped save my life. They gave me hope. They were human beings like I was. They wanted to love and to be loved, just like me, just like any other human being. And they gave so much to me. In one of those circles, one of the things that James, when I got a letter back from him that he struggled with, was forgiveness. He was having difficulty forgiving himself for what he had done, for killing Brian. I knew that I could not absolve him of that. That was his work. Healing is a choice. I shared that with him, and he had to find a way to heal from that. So in this one circle that I went back and I listened to one of the circle participants that were one of the inmates share his story about what got him there to death row. And it was really powerful again. And then when he was done, and I heard James, I heard this man condemning himself. He could never forgive himself. He'd been on death row almost 30 years. I mean, he was a baby himself when he committed his crime, and we don't allow people the space to change and evolve and to grow. And we don't allow God to do his work in them. This is my biggest issue, one of my biggest issues with the death penalty. I am so against it. I so don't believe in it. I don't think anybody has the right to take a life, including the men that are on death row. And guess what? The ones I have met, they know that. They know that. So going back to that particular circle, after JT told his story, we went around the circle to affirm him. And I was hearing the other men in there say to him, "Man, you are not a murderer. That's what you did. It's not who you are." Every one of them, in some way, that's what they told him. I was hearing it loud and clear. It's what you did. That's not who you are. The first circle I walked into, and I remember when JT walked into that room, and I want you to know that I felt his peace that just came from his spirit. Gentle. Just an amazing man. And so I fully agreed. The JT I knew, that was not who he was. It's what he did. And when I left that circle, I realized for myself, and it was really hard for me because I held on to this little piece of that sentencing hearing when the judge said that day to James, "Mr. Moore, you will always be a murderer because you took a man's life. But I don't believe you're a cold-blooded killer." I remember him saying that to James, and I remember grabbing onto that and saying, "That's right." And I shared that in other places when I went into schools, to talk to young people, and just different activities that I did. I had a foundation, I was down at probation, we did basketball tournaments and talked to young people, stop the violence kind of thing. And I would think about that, but when I heard the men that day share that, and I went home and I just cried because I'd started a letter to James, who was struggling to forgive himself. And I took that letter and I got rid of it and I started over, and this letter poured out of me. And in that letter, I told him, I reminded him of what the judge said that day. I told him how I felt somewhat vindicated by that, and I had, also repeated that many times. I don't believe you're a cold-blooded killer, but you will always be a murderer because you took my son's life. I didn't believe that anymore. And I told him I didn't believe that anymore because I'd shared enough in the way of the letters, honestly, to know. And I saw the look in his eye in that courtroom that day that I knew he truly, truly was remorseful for what he had done. And if he could have changed it, if he could take it back, if he could give me my son back, he absolutely would. And not because he was in trouble and in jail, because I believe truly in his heart he was sorry. And so I told him that I didn't believe he was a murderer. That is what he did. And I shared with him, about things that I know that I had done in my past, and I don't want to be defined by what I had done in my past. I'm a recovering addict of over 30 years, and I did a lot of things while I was under the influence. I did a lot of things in my past lifestyle. I was not the mother I needed to be to my small children, and I'm not proud of that. And that's not who I am today. And I think that's one of the things that when we talk about in the way of Jesus, that gets in our way. I know at times it's gotten in my way. I make assumptions, I stereotype. I see someone's behavior and I define them by it instead of seeing the person behind it. Addicts are a very good example. We often say hate the addiction, don't hate the addict. They're a suffering and sick human being that needs help, not condemnation. So that was really, again, life-changing for me. We shared a few more letters, James and I did, and and to fast forward to 2019, I wrote one last letter to James because he was getting ready to be released from prison. He got out at 15 years, and that was because he had good behavior, so he got out at his minimum time. And I wrote a letter to him, and it was really important. We had stopped writing, or he had stopped writing. And so I hope he got my last letter. I don't know if he did or not. It really makes me sad. All I'll say about us stopping the writing is he had a couple family members that found out that I was in touch with him, and they were not supportive of that. And I know that's because they didn't understand, and we never got to talk to one another. That's that big divide, So they made assumptions about me and about all this, and had to create their own reality about stuff that whatever it was they created wasn't true. So that makes me sad. And, I hope that can change in the future. So, but I wrote a last letter to him, and in that letter, what was really important for me to share with him was that he didn't owe me anything. Of course, I can't speak for anybody else. So many people were hurt and devastated and broken by my son's death. But my journey, he didn't owe me anything. He had paid his debt to society. He spent 15 years in prison where he literally grew up because he was a baby when he started that sentence. And, I knew that if he could again, undo what he'd done, give my son back that he absolutely would have. And that would be the only thing I would want from him. And that's not possible. So, I have, and moving forward, and this is truly a part of the living peacefully, loving freely, forgiving faithfully. I have to let go of this stuff. If I want to heal, if I want to keep growing, and stay on this journey with God and walk the way of Jesus, these are the principles that I have to live by for me today. This is part of my foundation, and some days it doesn't look real pretty. It is really hard to do. I have been challenged to forgive people that honestly was so hard, and it's really a process. But the freedom is mine, the freedom is mine. It's about not being tied to the details of that pain. And the only way that I can be free from any pain, any hurt, is to be willing to forgive. Even those that will never either own or apologize for what they've done. It doesn't matter. The way for me is forgiveness. The way for me is to live in peace with everyone as much as it depends on me. And the way for me is to truly love freely. And that doesn't mean I like everybody. It doesn't mean I trust everybody. It simply means that I love everybody in the sense that I know that I am no better, I am no worse than anyone, and nobody else is better or worse than me. We are on this journey together. We're all connected. I have a friend, and I think it's Ram Dass is the quote, but he's sent it to me. Unfortunately, he's incarcerated right now, but he sent me a little cutout from the paper, and it says, "We're all just walking each other home." That's the way.